For 20 years, the only sound on Silas Blackwood's ranch was the wind. He was a man who had buried his heart and lived with the ghost of silence. But one evening, 10 strangers appeared on his land, not as enemies but as desperate travelers. They would ask for shelter, but they would end up giving him back his soul. Silas woke each morning at 5. He made the same black coffee in the same tin pot. He ate the same breakfast of beans and bread. He fed his horses. He checked his fences. He ate dinner alone. He slept alone. This had been his life since the fever took his wife and son 2 decades ago. The ranch house still had their rooms, untouched, gathering dust like memories he could not face. The October evening started like any other. Silas was mending a harness on his porch when he saw them. 10 figures walked slowly up the dirt road to his ranch. As they got closer, he could see they were Apache. A tall man led them. Behind him were 2 women, 3 children, and 4 elders. They moved like people who had walked for days. The tall man stopped at the fence gate. He did not open it. He waited. Silas set down his harness and walked over. The man's face was weathered but proud. His eyes were steady. "My name is Cale," the man said. "We need shelter for one night." Silas looked at the group. One of the children, a girl no more than 6, was shivering. An elderly woman leaned heavily on a younger woman's arm. They all looked exhausted. "There's a storm coming," Cale continued. "We have nowhere else to go." Silas had not had visitors in 3 years. The last time was when the sheriff came to collect taxes. Now 10 Apache stood at his gate, asking for help. The smart thing would be to send them away. The town already thought he was strange. This would only make things worse. But the little girl shivering reminded him of another child long ago who had been cold and whom he could not save. "One night," Silas said. He opened the gate. The Apache family entered quietly. Silas showed them to the barn. It was warm and dry, with fresh hay. Cale nodded his thanks. The family began to settle in. Silas turned to leave, but the little girl who had been shivering walked up to him. She held out a small wooden horse, carved from pine. She placed it in his hand and smiled before running back to her mother. Silas stood there looking at the toy. He had not received a gift in 20 years. That night, Silas could not stop thinking about the family in his barn. He made a pot of stew, more than he could eat alone. He carried it to the barn with bowls and spoons. The Apache family looked surprised. They accepted the food with quiet gratitude. As they ate, Silas noticed how they cared for each other. The younger ones made sure the elders ate first. Parents gave their portions to their children. It was a family, something Silas had forgotten existed. The next morning brought trouble. Tom Garrett, a rancher from the neighboring property, had been riding early and saw the Apache family leaving the barn. Within 2 hours, half the town knew that Silas Blackwood was harboring Apaches. By noon, Sheriff Daniels arrived at the ranch. He was a decent man, but he looked worried. "Silas, you need to send them away," the sheriff said. "People in town are getting riled up. They're saying you're putting everyone in danger." "They're a family," Silas replied. "They're not hurting anyone. That doesn't matter to folks in town. You know how they think. Send them on their way before this gets ugly." Silas looked at the barn, then back at the sheriff. "They can stay until they're ready to leave." The sheriff shook his head. "You're making a mistake, Silas. I can't protect you if the town decides to take action." After the sheriff left, Silas went to the barn. Cal was teaching one of the boys how to repair a leather strap. The women were preparing food. The elders were resting. They were just people trying to survive. "The town knows you're here," Silas told Cal. "There might be trouble." Cal stood up. "We will leave now. We do not want to bring you harm." "No," Silas said, surprising himself. "You'll stay until you're ready. Let the town talk." That afternoon, Silas worked alongside the Apache men to reinforce a section of fence. They did not speak much, but there was understanding in the shared work. The little girl who had given him the wooden horse followed him around. She reminded him of his daughter, Sarah, who had loved to follow him during his chores. As the sun set, one of the elderly Apache women approached Silas. She spoke little English, but she pointed to a torn shirt he was wearing. She took it from him and began to mend it with skilled hands. When she finished, she handed it back with a gentle smile. Silas felt something crack inside his chest, like ice breaking on a frozen pond. That evening, they all ate together, not in the barn, but in Silas's house. He had not had people at his table in 20 years. The children laughed. The adults told stories in their language. Silas did not understand the words, but he understood the feeling. This was what a home was supposed to sound like. Cale told Silas their story through broken English and gestures. They had been forced from their land by soldiers. They were trying to reach relatives in the mountains. They had been walking for 2 weeks. They had lost everything except each other. Silas understood loss. He told Kyle about his wife, Mary, and his son, James. How the fever came one winter and took them both in 3 days. How he had not been able to save them. How he had shut himself away from the world because the world had taken everything from him. Cale placed a hand on Silas's shoulder. No words were needed. Late that night, Silas heard horses approaching. He looked out the window and saw torches. 5 men from town, led by Jake Morrison, the banker's son. They were drunk and angry. Silas stepped onto his porch with his rifle not pointed at anyone, but visible. "Send them out, Blackwood," Jake shouted. "We know you got Apaches in there." "They're my guests," Silas said calmly. "They'll leave when they're ready." "You're harboring enemies," another man yelled. "I see no enemies here," Silas replied. "Just scared men with torches, threatening innocent people." Jake dismounted and walked toward the porch. "You always were a strange one, Blackwood, living out here alone like some hermit. Now we know why. You're a traitor to your own kind." Silas set down his rifle. He walked down the porch steps until he was face to face with Jake. 20 years ago, when my family was dying, I begged this town for help. I begged for medicine, for a doctor, for anything. You know what your father told me, Jake? He said it was not his problem. The whole town turned its back on me. So do not talk to me about betrayal. The men behind Jake shifted uncomfortably. Some of them remembered. "These people asked for one thing," Silas continued. "Shelter from a storm. Something this town denied me when I needed it most. I will not be the kind of man you all were. If you want to hurt them, you'll have to go through me." The silence stretched out. Then from the darkness, Sheriff Daniels rode up. He looked at the men with torches. "Everyone go home," the sheriff ordered. "Now." Jake started to protest, but the sheriff cut him off. "I said now. Anyone who doesn't leave immediately will spend the night in jail." The men grumbled but mounted their horses and rode away. The sheriff looked at Silas. "They'll be gone by morning?" he asked. "If they're ready," Silas replied. The sheriff nodded and rode off. The next morning the storm had passed. The Apache family prepared to continue their journey. They packed their few belongings. The children said goodbye to the horses. The women left the house cleaner than they had found it. Cale approached Silas. He removed a leather cord from around his neck. On it hung a small piece of turquoise, smooth and blue like the sky after rain. He placed it in Silas's hand. "For kindness," Kyle said. Silas went into the house. He came back with a bag of food, blankets, and his best knife. He gave them to Cale. "For the journey," Silas said. The little girl ran up and hugged Silas's leg. She looked up at him and said something in Apache. Her mother translated, "She says you have a good heart." Silas knelt down and handed the girl the wooden horse she had given him. She shook her head and pushed it back into his hands. It was his to keep. The family walked down the road. Silas watched until they disappeared over the hill. The ranch was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the heavy silence of grief, but the peaceful quiet of a man at rest with himself. That evening, Silas sat on his porch with coffee. The wooden horse sat on the table beside him. He thought about opening the rooms that had been closed for 20 years. Maybe it was time to let the light back in. A week later, the sheriff stopped by. He mentioned that the Apache family had made it safely to the mountains. He also mentioned that some folks in town were talking about Silas differently. Not everyone, but some. They remembered what he had said about the town's failure to help him. A few were ashamed. Silas continued his routine, but small things changed. He started going to town for supplies instead of having them delivered. He nodded to people on the street. Some nodded back. The banker's son still glared at him, but others offered quiet greetings. One day, a young couple's wagon broke down near his ranch. They were nervous about asking the strange rancher for help, but Silas fixed their wheel and invited them in for coffee. Word spread that Silas Blackwood was not the hermit people thought he was. The wooden horse sat on his mantle. Sometimes Silas would look at it and remember the little girl's smile. He would remember Kyle's steady eyes. He would remember the elderly woman mending his shirt. He would remember that for a few days his house had been a home again. Silas Blackwood learned that a home is not just walls and a roof, but a place where compassion lives. He learned that shutting out the world meant shutting out not just pain, but also the possibility of connection. The Apache family had asked for shelter, but they had given him something more valuable. They had reminded him how to be human. What did you think of Silas's decision to help the Apache family despite the danger? Let us know in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories from the Old West that show the power of human kindness in the hardest of times. Thank you for watching, and remember that sometimes the greatest courage is simply opening your door to those in need.